This is his third Oscar nomination, and he also won for The Artist. He's worked with Paul since Part 8. And, yeah, right there. And producer Joanne Sellar. She's worked with Paul since Boogie Nights. This is her second Oscar nomination after There Will Be Blood. And Mr. Paul Thomas Anderson. So there's a question I've been dying to ask you for the longest time, which is the stairs, the motif of the stairs, the up and down.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? I mean, everybody goes up to see Reynolds.
Well, the meaning of the stairs. No, we had a house that we were going to shoot in. We were going to shoot this film in, and about 2 months, a month and a half before we started shooting, we lost that house. And it just caused all kinds of panic. And the great thing is that the staircase in that house was the least interesting thing about that house. It had a million other great things about it, but it was always nagging at me that it didn't have a great staircase. And so this fantastic location manager that we worked with discovered the house that you see in the film, and had the best staircase. And I remember talking to Joanne and saying, like, well, I don't know how this movie's going to look, but the staircase is going to be pretty fucking good, you know? Because it's the nature of those houses anyway, how they were, was that you have these Georgian townhouses where the majority of real estate is dedicated to the theater of the clients coming in. So in other words, let's say this is your living room, you know, it's got like 3 pieces of furniture and really great lighting just for you to put your dress on. But meanwhile, all the work with 50 seamstresses happens like mice up in this little attic, you know, and it was just it was the nature of how they worked, it was the nature of how they did it, the presentation of something that was opulent and beautiful, but meanwhile there's like these women toiling away like with no air, bad lighting, and everything else, making all these dresses. So yeah, that's kind of what that is, and that is the nature of it, is that he'll stand there at the top of those steps and kind of look down at you and greet you in this sort of anticipation. And that was something that came to us, but it was something that we read about when we were reading about these coutures at the time. It was always about that kind of, then these women live for this moment to kind of meet the dressmaker. You know, it was a very theatrical moment, and it was really important to the whole experience that they were selling.
I'll have you explain your inspirations for Phantom Thread. I know that there was Gothic romances like Rebecca, and there was a story with Maya, which you could tell everyone. But how did fashion come into it? How did fashion just wrap this all up and tie it in a bow?
Yeah, fashion. The idea. Well, I think the idea that you're referring to is that Daniel Day-Lewis, not Daniel Lupi, who is married to Joanne, who's our other producer. Daniel Day-Lewis and I were working on the script and the story, and we did not have a job for this man. We had a man who was selfish and self-centered and cranky and all the rest, and so we needed a job for him to do. And I discovered a few things. Cristobal Balenciaga was a great fashion designer in the 1950s who worked in Paris, and he was such an inspiration because his work was first, his life was second. Well, they were kind of intertwined, but everything about his life was dedicated to his work. So that really rung all our bells and got Daniel and I really going. I think we really related to that as people who probably become dangerously close to putting our work before anything else, you know. So it was a fascinating world, and it looked great. And I brought it to Mark with like relish, like excited, like I think I've got a good idea that you might like, you know. So that's kind of how it happened, and the more we looked into it, the more we felt like we hadn't seen this movie before. There have been movies about fashion, there's been great movies about fashion, but somehow London in the 1950s felt like it hadn't been done. It felt like a great opportunity to look at this world that was still kind of a little bit stuck in another time entirely. You know, once the 60s came around, that was kind of it. It was really unfashionable to have fancy clothes. So this is still something that was like left over from Elizabethan times practically. It was still like dragging in to another era. Yeah, in a way, yeah, it's the 50s, but it could be the 1800s, it could be the 1700s. It's still something else entirely. It's so timeless in that way. So yeah.
Did you when you started receiving pages, did you see what you could do with, such as like with the progression with Alma's character in terms of style, where she comes from, you know, she's a waitress and then she's wearing stripes, I noticed, by the end of the film. I don't know if that was coincidental. On New Year's Eve, she's wearing stripes, like she's in jail.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, that was just, I liked that dress. But, you know, when receiving pages, you know, it always feels the same process with Paul, whether, you know, I'm getting fascinating pages about oil drilling or, you know, hippie noir, or, you know, and this was just another version of that, really, where how do we create this world? How do we make it be a viable story through the clothes? And, you know, he always has a wealth of things that have inspired him, and I just want to soak it all in and try to bring it to life, you know.
Joanne, how do you know when a Paul Thomas Anderson script is ready?
Well,
It's still not done.
yeah,
I mean,
exactly. We're
I'm
working
still
on it
writing
right
it.
now.
Yeah.
No. Well, Paul usually sends me early drafts, and then we talk about it a lot, and then he'll send it to other like people who are close collaborators, and we kind of just get to a point where we feel like this is ready to go out and try and get financing. So it usually takes. I mean, it's not. I mean, with this, it was pretty.
I think the answer to the question is when you have more scenes that are good versus scenes that are shit. Like really, that's kind of genuinely when you have 51% scenes where it seems like that's actually pretty good. It's kind of like, let's get started. And it's not being facetious. It genuinely is. It's such a kind of like, it's just such a long process. Sometimes you're just constantly trying to find the tone of something, and there's always going to be variables. But I think you have to have deadlines. I mean, generally at a certain point, you know.
We had Daniel Day-Lewis had, you know, a certain time frame that he wanted to make it in, and we kind of like, well, this is ready. Let's go out and get the money. And then, you know, Paul continues to work on the script during the whole process of finding the locations. That dictates a lot, and then obviously he works with the actors. That dictates, you know, so it's kind
Daniel
of
was
an
ready
ongoing process.
Daniel was ready
Yeah,
to start
he
shooting
was
way before we were.
Yeah.
I think it was just that he hadn't made a film in a long time, and he was really
He'd done
ready to
his
shoot,
research.
and he wanted to start, and I really had to be the voice to speak to him, like Joanne and I both, sort of saying like, we're not going to be ready, you know. He was just chomping at it, and his instincts were right. He kind of knew, we'd done so much in the writing that you had this feeling of like, we've done it. I think we had that on There Will Be Blood too, where there was this point where you have something that you can research, and at a certain point, it is a crutch, that you can find yourself burying your head in the research, and that disallows you from actually engaging in what it has to become, which is this other thing. You know, you have to kind of, it's like putting your pencil down when there's a test and the teacher's like, pencils down, and you keep writing and you keep writing, you're like, no, just, and then I think Daniel was the one, I said it last time on There Will Be Blood, I was like, right, fucking heads down, we have to stop looking at how to get oil out of the ground. And he was the one that did it this time, and he was like, we have to stop, because we're not going to be coutiers, right? So we have to pretend that we're coutiers. So we're ready now. So now let's get on with it. And it's really good. It's this kind of system of checks and balances, I think, that we all have, where we're always kind of like tuning into what the other person might need, you know.
And he's in character the entire time when you're on set.
That's right.
And
So, yeah.
and he learned how to sew 100 buttons.
I don't know the number, but he does an enormous amount of homework, and
And Mark
I
put
think-
him in touch with Mark Happel, who was the costume designer for the New York Ballet.
yeah,
Which
and he learned. I think
about a
Daniel
year,
made
yeah.
a copy of Balenciaga day dress, you know, from his learning, and worked very hard.
Yeah.
Right, wasn't
For his
it?
wife, yeah.
And I think she wore it
Yeah.
out. I think Rebecca wore
That's
it
what I
out.
heard.
So, I mean, it was good. He does his homework and was, you know, I look at that performance and I believe it. I see how he looks over his glasses, how he looks in the mirror to see what she's wearing. I do it. It seems so perfect to me.
I was going to save this to the end, but of course, the elephant in the room. Everyone talks about, you know, this is his last role, yada, yada, yada. But here's the thing. Do you think you could talk him out of retirement? Like, is there a way to get him excited? Hopefully, please.
I know the feeling that you're sad, you're disappointed. It's irritating to think that this would be the last time that we would see Daniel act in a movie, because it does feel like there's probably more that he has to give. But I think on the other hand, we just have to be really happy with what he's given us. I mean, I kind of look back and I got to see some Marlon Brando performances in the theater, but I didn't get to see the ones that I didn't get to see on the waterfront in the theater. You know, I suppose everyone here, I mean, we got to see Daniel. We got to live in a time when Daniel Day-Lewis, the screen would open up, curtains would open up, Daniel Day-Lewis. So we have to be happy with that and probably just sort of take him at his word that this is it, which is a drag, but let's be thankful that we got to see what he did. You know, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'll try and talk him into it in a couple of years, but well, let's wait and see.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is how you work with your actors. I once had the opportunity to interview Amy Adams, and for The Master, and it was like she was trying to protect the secret sauce. She didn't want to spill the beans, and I was just curious: is it a mixture of the script and a heavy dose of improvisation? Is there?
It's ketchup and mayonnaise, and with relish. That's the secret sauce. That Lisa McDonald. It's a lot of it is scripted. I have no problems with improvisation. I'm not fussy at all about the script. Really super unfussy. Probably more scripted than not, and that's not trying to say anything great about my writing. The improvisation happens. I think we try to keep a certain kind of tightness and looseness, if that makes sense. In other words, we do a lot of talking beforehand, you know, not on the day, you know, in front of the crew where everybody's there. No crew wants to sit and watch a director and an actor talk about motivation. It's really unproductive. It's really unprofessional, quite frankly. It needs to happen, all that kind of stuff about what's going on needs to happen beforehand, so that when you come to the set that day, you can be efficient and loose, open to things that might happen, and that does happen a lot. And I think, you know, at the same time that you're being efficient, you have to also be open to the possibility that you might not have it right, and if you don't have it right, what are the practical ways that you can get it right, you know? And sometimes that means stopping, reassessing, you know, doing things again, going on to other things. There's no secret sauce, honestly. It's probably a lot messier than you might imagine. I think the idea is to make it look seamless and beautiful, but behind the scenes there's a lot of stitching going on, trying to figure it all out.
I'm totally going off script here with my questions.
Good. That's good.
Working with Altman, you directed. You were involved with his last movie.
That's right.
Can you talk about how he was an inspiration for you?
Sure.
I know that, like, once we had to do, when I was at Variety, a Robert Altman issue, and I spoke with a number of the actors that worked with him, and they always talked about him protecting them, and there was a lot of improvisation, but just he was an important, was an important person for you?
Big time, professionally and personally. Obviously, I knew his film as a young man growing up, and thought, that looks good. That's how I want to do it, you know. And then getting to know him personally, he was very generous with his time to me. The work that we did together was his last film, Prairie Home Companion, when he was getting ill and he needed an insurance a director to stand by. My wife was in the film. She was pregnant, so I was going to be there anyway. It was a perfect situation. So we were in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I got to sit by his side for 30 days and watch him direct Prairie Home Companion, the film. And that protection that actors talk about when it comes to Bob, it just has to do with a looseness and a confidence. They feel like they can make fools of themselves, and he was a good audience. He was super generous, but he was not above it. But it wasn't all this just kind of like loosey-goosey. It's loose, but the great thing was there were parameters. You know, he would be specific, which I think was so helpful to actors. They really wanted something very specific. They didn't want to just sort of like be told, oh, be funny. You know, that's very irritating for an actor. It's very directionless, actually. Direction is a good thing, as long as it's not overly specific or overly kind of domineering or something like that. He's not gonna. He might suggest chew gum, but he's not gonna tell you how to chew the gum. Do you know what I mean? So I think the actors really just responded to that with him, and the actors that he worked with will all uniformly say that the most fun that they ever had was working with him. And look, they might not have been the best movies that those actors were in, but at the end of the day, it was the experience that they had making it, and he made you feel that the experience was the most important part, which I completely feel. I mean, I don't know that I used to feel that when I started out. I thought the result was the most important thing, but at this point now, I think I speak for all of us. We're way too old to not really enjoy doing what we're doing while we're doing it.
Joanne, what was your, I mean this in a good way, what were some of the great challenges on this? Like he was mentioning the house.
The house was most probably, in terms of a production thing, the most challenging, trying to find a house in the centre of London. And we talked about early on about building it, and we all kind of ruled that out. That wasn't going to be to build a set, you know, and just do exteriors. So we were looking for a real house in the centre of London that we were going to take over for, this was like 3 months with all the set decorating and stuff that had to take place. And that was hard to find somewhere that wasn't like completely modernised, that we needed to take that down, or what else we were finding was like complete shells that needed really, really like full renovation. And then, as Paul said, we found this place, and that was going to be the house, and we spent months kind of wrecking that and, you know, quite far along, and then we lost it at the last minute, and then this one kind of fell into our laps, and it was like actually a better house from a visual point of view. As Paul said, the staircase and everything, but it came with its own set of like rules. We were shooting in Fitzroy Square, and there was a whole committee, and it was like we could only film this at an amount of days, and blah blah blah. So
But the limitations are
Yeah,
what ended up being so fantastic. I mean,
yeah,
everybody was
Paul
sort of
actually
like
liked the
really,
limitations.
really helpful. I mean, you can only shoot from 8 to 8, and I mean,
Although I was down on my hands and knees begging for another couple of days to like.
yes, that's true. I mean, they really only wanted us there for a certain amount of time, and yeah, you were
Yeah.
begging, and yeah, for sure. But
But it was a great house, and it looks great in the movie.
yeah, I mean, when you're like, you know, doing a scene with Daniel Day-Lewis talking to his dead mother, and you have to be out of there in 30 seconds, and you realize like, holy shit, like I can hear people packing up. I can hear commuters like breaking the line that the PAs are trying to use. It's like, what have we gotten ourselves into? But the irony was like, looks pretty fucking great to me on film. I mean, you really kind of like, the limitations were good ultimately, really, really good.
Now, beautiful, sublime camera work, just amazing. How did the whole thing come about where there was no cinematographer. Like, just discuss that. And did you store? I'm watching the movie again today, and I mean, the scene, even the cutting of the mushrooms up close, gorgeous, just fantastic. Talk about that.
It was a very communist way of working, I suppose, that we had. I work with a gaffer, a grip, a camera operator, and a first assistant cameraman very closely. I've done tons of little projects on the side, not features, but we wanted to continue that way of working. And it was a way that we could work in England, without having an official cinematographer. And it was a kind of a challenge that I think we put to ourselves, that we really had talked about wanting to do, and we decided to do it. And which was good, to scare ourselves and to really sort of try something. We were really paranoid about it failing, and I don't think we did. I think we did good, and I think it was a lot of work, a lot of testing, they're just great collaborators. Michael Bauman, Colin Anderson, Eric Brown, and Jeff Kunkel, and
So we brought them over from America then?
That's right, we brought them over from America, and we work with a fantastic English crew, set of electricians there. What else can I tell you? I don't know, it was just it was making it up as we go along.
I mean, was there a lot of storyboarding, or was it
No, not really. Not really. I mean, there was a lot of scouting and talking about what could happen, and not really, and a lot of possibilities of what might happen. Bigger things had to be not necessarily storyboarded, but written out and really planned out. Obviously, things with a lot of extras. That was planned out. But the great thing about working in a house over and over and over again is that you have room to discover things. You have room to improvise. You do all this work, but the second you're collecting more scenes that really are revealing themselves. Like, these are the scenes that work, so that really you get in a flow. By the end of the day, you start looking around at each other like, quick meeting, what are we going to do first thing in the morning? And you map out a few shots about what might happen, because you're ready for Daniel to go. You don't want to say to Daniel, here's where you're going to stand over there and you're going to walk over here. You want him to be able to come in and say, what about this, what about that? And so you kind of leave some looseness, but you prepare where the lights might be, and for best case scenario, worst case scenario is, shit, we just came up with something different, and you adjust. But we just got into a flow. It's like anything. Like, after the first couple weeks, we really got into a good groove. And when it starts to go good, it starts to go good. And that's the addiction that keeps you coming back. You're like, oh my God, we're making plays, we're making shots. It's working. And that is a great feeling. I mean, it's an unbeatable feeling. Going to dailies that day and saluting each other, really being confident about what you have. It gets you out of bed the next day, because around the corner there's going to be a disaster. There's going to be oh fuck, and you're just right back down to being an amateur again. You're like, fuck, and that's that's the joy of it. I have to say, it's addicting.
Did Daniel have a lot of notes on his costumes? Did he have any suggestions, or the other actors as well, Leslie?
Mostly Daniel. He knows that world, and I think he suggested Anderson Shepherd. He suggested having shoes made at Cleverly. I had the great fortune of going shopping with him on Jermyn Street, and to Drake's and to Bud's shirt makers and things, to buy scarves or pajamas or neckties or whatever. So it was a really fun education. When his schedule allowed, we could get together and would happily meet him. We'd usually do it after fitting at Anderson Shepherd, but it was great fun. And he suggested the pink socks, the Pope socks. I think I got a text that was Bishop socks, and that said, Gamarelli, Rome.
Yeah. They're from the Ecclesiastical Outfitters in Rome.
Yeah.
For anybody
Bishop
that wants
socks,
to do a deep cut on where those socks are from.
To me, it plays so beautifully, because the difference between a man who wears those socks and who wears black socks is extraordinary with that one little detail.
And the food, he has such an appetite. How did that come? I mean, it complements the film so well, that detail. How did that work its way in?
It probably started when Daniel and I were writing There'll Be Blood. We used to go to breakfast, and I'm a big breakfast orderer, and he would make fun of how big my breakfasts were. So I think in the course of our relationship, we have a breakfast obsession. And it just ended up, it's one of those things between you that you end up, it ends up making its way into the movie, and kind of staying there. So half the time you think like you're just fucking around trying to make him laugh. The next thing you know, like it's in the movie and it stays there. You're like, oh, okay. But I think it's indicative of, it's this character, this person that would have an appetite that large. Like, a lot about somebody like that they could eat a breakfast that big and stay that rail thin, that their mind is obviously like devouring calories like every minute. So yeah, that's all that is like me probably trying to make Daniel laugh by like a great breakfast order. And then it just sticks,
Take us into your writing day. Can you share a little bit about your process? Do you write late at night? Are you like a 9 to 5 guy? Is it?
I'm pretty 9 to 5, but I back up. My day starts earlier than that. I like to write in the morning. When I was a kid, I don't know who said it. I read that somebody said you should write in the morning, and I just took it very seriously, and I stuck with that. I think it was that I would wake up before I went to school, because I always felt like when I got home from school I was too tired. So I would wake up before school, like a good couple hours. I would wake up about 5:30, and I would write for a few hours. Because I felt like once I went to school, like I was just fucking miserable. I was like, oh God, I gotta go to school from like 8:30 to 3:30, and just dying to get back home to write my scripts. So that habit has stuck with me into adulthood, and that's when I write. I write early in the morning, and I wrote this really closely with Daniel. I would share things with him between every day and every couple weeks, depending on where we were in the process. Initially, there were larger stretches where I wouldn't check in with him, where I was sort of busy trying to accumulate enough to go back to him. That didn't seem worthwhile to go back to him with 2 pages. It was like, I needed to get 20 or 30 and say, I've made a dent in this, so here I am. And that by the time I got about halfway through, we were really working together every day, back and forth, as the story was progressing. Once we got a foothold into what the story was going to be, it all happened very, very quickly. It was like an avalanche. The whole back half of the story just happened. And that kind of happened concurrently with all the research that we were doing about these men. Yeah, funny way of working, actually. I've never really worked that closely with somebody in the writing, but it was...
I was going to ask, have you done that before, like
No.
with Philip Seymour Hoffman?
Well, yeah, with Phil I would do it, but it was slightly different. I don't know, because Phil was always off making another film or something like that, so I would get time with him in the cracks. But this was different. This was really concentrated. With Phil, it would be different. It would be over a longer period of time and more here and there, and it'd be more alone. And then when we get together, it would be super concentrated and kind of rushed towards making the film.
I'm going to open it up for a couple of questions. Yes.
What's the process like working with Jonny Greenwood?
The process working with Jonny Greenwood is heavenly. Really close, really, like from the beginning. We start working, like I don't even know what I'm gonna write next, but I'll start talking to Jonny about that I don't know what I'm gonna write next. In other words, so from the very beginning. So this film, he would get pages, he would get research material, we have a lot of leftover material from things from other films that hasn't been used, so maybe some of that gets recycled. Sometimes he'll come up with new stuff as we go along, and it gets more and more serious as the process goes along. Like dailies start to come, we get deeper into production, and then more music starts coming from Jonny, and then it gets even more serious. We're editing, and more music comes from Jonny, and then the music that he's provided starts to get placed with the picture, and usually he's kind of waiting to see if it's gonna land or not. Like, you know, he's like, don't make me fucking work my ass off and for something that's not gonna be in there. So it's a kind of combination, it's really back and forth. Just he's integral to it. It's the opposite of cutting a film and delivering it to a composer. They're done hand in hand. We're editing to the rhythms of pieces that he's created, editing on the cuts or just off the cut intentionally. So I just can't stress how intimate it is, right?
Yeah, it's very early on.
Yeah.
I mean, compared to other composers, it's like he's there from day one.
Wow. Yes, in the back.
The pacing of the film is quite fascinating. There's a kind of deliberate, the pauses and then the beats go seemingly in a very almost, I don't know if it's fair to say, a kind of contemplative or meditative pace. Could you speak about that a little bit? Is that something that you wanted from the very beginning?
Well, yeah. God, I'm nervous that you're saying it's too slow.
I'm just saying it's a very significant characteristic, it seems, of the piece.
Well, it's good. It's good when people take the. You know, I suppose you can really get people's attention when somebody stops talking and stares, or you can lose their attention. And that's one of two things could happen. I think maybe there's a lot riding on moments of silence probably in this movie, and looks between people at the breakfast table. So there's a lot that happens in those moments. I mean, our whole climax of our film is dependent upon two people staring at each other and not saying a word to each other for about 3 or 4 minutes. And that goes back to my thing of just love of silent movies. And you know, Daniel will always say, when we had a scene where he didn't have to say anything, he'd be so happy. He's like, I love the scenes when I don't have to talk. And actually all actors have said that to me. They love it. They love this sort of thing when they can just kind of act without saying words. It's funny that. And I think it's just a cinematic thing that if you can get something going, it makes it more universal, doesn't it, really? It's like it's not in any language. It's a language that everybody understands. It's me looking at you and you looking at me and me thinking, or you thinking, whatever that is, we can all understand it. We don't need dialogue, we don't need subtitles, we don't need anything. So, yeah, they're great. They're great moments when they work, for sure.
Yes.
Could you talk about the two co-stars, Leslie Manville and Vicky?
Right.
Creeps.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Vicky is. It's funny. I think Daniel Day-Lewis is never a co-star to anybody. But the funny thing is, if you look at the movie, he's the co-star to
That's why
them. That's what's
that's
funny.
why I
you know?
mentioned those two.
Yeah.
Both
but that's who
equally.
we know. We know Daniel so well, and we expect it to be his film. But our protagonist is really Alma, is this woman, Vicky Creeps, who we found. She's Luxembourgish. She's done a bunch of smaller films in Germany and France and Luxembourg. We found her through an audition. I could not have ticked more boxes in terms of what we were looking for. She's beautiful, but you can also believe that she's this kind of single girl, like working in a tea shop, you know, and then she puts these gowns on and she's absolutely looks ravishingly gorgeous. I mean, so she had everything, and she was sort of fearless. She might have had some fear, but I didn't see it.
No, she was remarkable.
Yeah,
she was
Remarkable.
she just sort of leads
And
with
also
her
very
chin.
beautiful. I mean, you shot her beautifully.
Yeah. So that's Vicky, who's remarkable, and Leslie's been around forever. She's one of England's greatest.
But superb, a
Actresses.
superb performance from her.
Oh,
Always.
yeah.
In the looks. You just talk about the camera and the looks.
Yeah.
Superb.
Yeah. Well, those are our girls. They're good ones to get. Yeah. Leslie is an amazing actress.
With Vicky, with the role of Elmo, it was important that it be someone who we didn't know.
We didn't know. Yeah, it was better. It was better, I think. The idea was that it's more. Oh, I don't know, what was the idea? I'm trying to remember. The
We
idea
kind of
was,
did a wide search to sort of unknown European and Eastern European
yes, but the
actresses.
idea of it being somebody that you've never seen before was good because, well, I don't know, there's nobody,
Because you wanted her to be like
a mystery,
Yeah.
yeah.
Whereas if it had been a known actress, it wouldn't have felt nearly.
I don't think it
No.
would have been right. It's always exciting when you see somebody on the screen that you've never seen before anyway, you know, or that maybe most American audiences haven't seen before. We were kind of, Daniel and I were always looking for Joan Fontaine, like, as an Eastern European. That was the image that we had in our mind. Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more of Vicky. She's a terrific actress. She has so much to give. You'll see.
One more. Yes.
Yes, first of all, I love the film.
Thank you.
I love your pacing. I love the weighted moments. It was just so filled with nuance, and it just stopped my heart and stopped my breath. So, thank you for that.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, because it's historically known that Daniel will work on a character, say, for a year and stay in character. And during his process with you in the writing, how long did he work on the character?
Well, the work on the script was the working on the character. So everything from the minute we really got together, we were accumulating info for him to use and utilize. But maybe the defining moment where Daniel was not coming back and Reynolds was there probably happened about 2 or 3 weeks
Yeah.
before we started shooting. When we came back in January after Christmas, there was somebody else in front of us, and it wasn't Daniel. It was, that's Reynolds Woodcock, you know. And I didn't see Daniel again until recently, probably. No, really, I didn't see Daniel or really hear from Daniel, the Daniel that I know, again until maybe like May or June. We finished in April. So he kind of, and it's great. I know it sounds nuts. It does sound nuts, but it makes so much sense.
Immersive, yeah.
You know, it's like, if anything, it makes you wonder why nobody else does it. That's the irony of it. You think like, well, why wouldn't everybody do this? I mean, it's only 3 months. If you could act like somebody else for 3 months, like, you know, if you play with your kids, you're playing with your kids. They don't want you to break character. They want you to be a Ninja Turtle. They want you to be a Ben 10. They want you to be that character. They don't want you to suddenly say like, all right, it's time to go to dinner. You know, they want to stay in it. And honestly, it is. If it's make-believe or if it's this childish game that we're all pretending to create the illusion of reality, then the more that you stay with it, the more you stay in it, the more concentrated it is, the more that you're convincing an audience that it is really happening. So as bizarre as it sounds, it really is. It's great.
And one last note: is it true he came up with the name, the character's name?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean he's a full service package, you know.
The Phantom Thread. 6 Oscar nods: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Score, Best Costumes. Daniel Day-Lewis, Lead Actor. Leslie Manville, Best Supporting Actress.
And best
Thank you.
costume design.
Best costume design, Mark Bridges.
Thank you very much, everybody.